Guiding principles, we know we have to have a filtering system. What are the important questions we continue to ask? What are our I believe statements as we advance through the process? And so these are the things that we return to, whether it's in a navigators meeting, whether it's in a trailblazers meeting. I'll introduce you to those groups here in a minute. Whether it's in a board work session, what do we return to as we advance through this process? And we believe these things very strongly. And this has become our filter in Pathway to Greatness. So the process, if you begin over on the left, vertical, we talk just a little bit about that because that really set the course for where we are tonight. So data, Policy D12, that's a school board policy that our board said, as we do this, we've got to return to data. This can't be my opinion. This can't be, I'm just going to argue one way or another. We've got to have an informed process. And D12 sets out 9 criteria that we have looked at that our partners from ADG, the firm we hired to come in and evaluate our buildings, our processes, they use those 9 criteria in Policy D12 to return data to us. Input from stakeholders. So ADG, I mentioned them, and that's the firm we have hired as a district to go in and evaluate facilities. We meet with them for hours and hours and hours weekly as a staff. The Trailblazer group, that's the group of school experts. So teachers, school principals, district level administrators on that team. Their job was to do the research on what is the ideal way to deliver education. They talked about grade bands. They talked about start and stop times. They talked about ideal school sizes. All of the research that's out there to inform us about how we deliver school ideally. So if you're in the room and you are on the Trailblazer group, would you stand and let us recognize you? And we appreciate the work that you have done. Thank you. So again, a group of our school experts, our teachers, our principals, and our district administrators. We had a group called the Navigators, and the Navigators were a group of community members. So representatives from our community, from all areas of our community, who came in and looked at the data. So we had D12, 9 criteria, ADG pumping out data. Navigators said, what does this mean? How does this bring value? How do we use this data to inform us so that we can help create pathways? If you're on the Navigator team, would you stand up and let us recognize you as well? And I know many of you are scattered through our audience. Thank you. And collectively, those two groups put in literally hundreds of hours, probably, of their time because they want what's right for this school district. They want what's best for this school district. So thank you both for your service. We have lots of different opportunities from input. We've been around the district once already. You guys remember we went and talked about process to 5 of our high schools. We had people from community come into the auditorium and we went through a similar presentation, but it really focused on process. We heard input, and I'm going to show you results of the input here in just a second, that we are listening. One of the things I'm most proud of as far as this board and the staff and the way we have approached this is we have taken every opportunity to communicate well, to be transparent, and to let people know this is the direction we're going. With that said, I know that we didn't reach nearly enough people. I know that we've got to find different ways to communicate, but we have been as transparent as we know to be, and I'm very pleased with that. So tonight, A, B, and C, we're going to deliver to our board tonight 3 pathways, any of which on its own we believe to be a viable option to do school differently beginning in August. And so they're going to be identified as A, B, and C, and then tomorrow we start second round of community engagement meetings. So tomorrow we're at U.S. Grant at 6 o'clock. We're back at U.S. Grant the next night at 6 o'clock, and it will be done in Spanish. And then next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I get these confused, but I think we're at Star Spencer, Northwest, Douglas. It may not be in that order, but go to our website. Okay, and you can find place and time next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And unlike tonight, this is informational only for our board. At each of those community meetings, we will take your input. So I'll present this exact presentation, and then we will give the mic to our audience. We want to hear from our stakeholders, and so that will start tomorrow night. And then you'll see a final pass on February 19th. I will make a recommendation to this board whether we're going to go with path A, path B, or path C. They will have until March 4th where we will come back as a group and they will vote on that recommendation. So trade-ups, another word for trade-ups is we're going to go through some pain here. There are going to be school closures. I've been saying that from the day I stepped into this 8 months ago, and that is a fact. And we're going to see which ones and what that looks like. And unfortunately, that has dominated the narrative of Pathway to Greatness, and I understand that. What I want to focus on here for a little bit is, if we're going to do this, what are we going to get as a group of families, as a group of teachers and educators, as a group of students? You're closing my school, you're reconfiguring my school, you're disrupting my life. What are we getting in return? And this is the exciting part, and this is what I want to spend a little bit of time on. So again, looking at some good work that's already been done in the district. You may remember the Great Commitment. I know many of you were a part of that. It's our strategic plan in the district. It sets out goals and objectives and strategies. Our 4 pillars are listed up here: great teaching and learning, great people, great systems, great culture. Good work already existing in the district. So we now take Pathway to Greatness and we tie those green boxes or general statements about what these trade-ups might look like. So increased access to learning opportunities. I will detail that out here in just a minute. Better support for teachers. More resources dedicated to serving students, and additional or added social supports for students. So generally, those are trade-ups, and now we'll dig into some of the detail. So over on that left ribbon, you see key Trailblazer recommendations. The work of the Trailblazers came back to us in the form of recommendations. So they look at the research, they do the studies, they look at other urban districts, they reach out, have conversations, and then they come back to us and say, here's how we think we can do school differently. So the image represents this. We know that the research is very clear on, in elementary schools, you need to have at least 3 teachers in every grade level. So currently, 2 out of 5 meet that designation. Through the Pathway to Greatness, every single elementary in our district will have a minimum of 3 teachers in every grade level. So why is that important? So right now, imagine in a school that only has 1 teacher in every grade level, which exists multiple times in our district. And let's say that that teacher is a first-year teacher, and then let's add to it that that first-year teacher is an emergency certified teacher, and there's only 1 of me in my school. And let's say that other teachers in my school who are also single teachers, singleton teachers in another grade level fit that same characteristic. Who am I collaborating with? Who am I working with? If things don't go well, I have my principal who has another full plate dealing with other issues that principals do. I do not have a teammate to collaborate with. Where does that show up when it happens that way? It shows up with our students. The better prepared I am as a teacher, the more collaboration that exists, the more research I can do that's sound and then implement into my classroom, it shows up with our kids. So what we have said is through P2G, every single school will have that minimum of 3 teachers per grade level. So second recommendation, Trailblazer said, research talks to us about, is there an ideal school size? We know that, take elementary as an example, we have elementary schools at 180 or so kids. And then we have elementaries that are 900, almost 1,000 kids. Big range. Different things happening in the buildings, different opportunities. So there's opportunity, there's equity issue. Trailblazer said there is a range that makes sense. So currently, The top two bars, elementary schools right now in the ideal range, only 40% of our elementaries. Through the process, we will double that, and we will continue to move toward 100%. In the secondary school, in the middle school, 36% fall into that 650 to 1,000 range. Here we're going to balance, and 92% of our middle schools will fall into that range. And then finishing up this slide with the high school, we will double the number of high schools who fall into the 1,000, 2,000 range. So here's an interesting number, and this is maybe some clarification. So U.S. Grant right now has right at 2,000 kids, just short of 2,000 kids. So hey, they fall in the range, so that's a good thing, right? If you know anything about U.S. Grant and how it's operating, they have run out of space. So it also speaks to capacity. So we have models in place in A, B, and C where we greatly reduce the number of students who attend U.S. Grant. Freeing up space, I can use space differently, and it's a value add to that school where kids are not crammed together, moving through hallways, too many kids in classes. This is an answer to that. So we've identified through the recommendation that there is a good school size, an ideal school size. So another recommendation, actually this is not a recommendation. This is how we currently exist. So we are all over the board with regard to grade bands. So we have, starting at the bottom, we have elementary pre-K to 5, pre-K to 6, middle school 2 grades, middle school 3 grades, mid-high, and so on. So we are a transient district, meaning we have a lot of kids and families who move within the district. So if you can imagine the challenge, if I have a 6th grade son and he's at an elementary school, a pre-K through 6, and we move into an area of the city where 6th grade is a part of the middle school, or 6th grade is a part of a mid-high school. I went from an elementary setting to a high school setting potentially, and the challenges that come with that. So what Trailblazer said is we need to provide some consistency. So this is what we're proposing as a part of our reinvention, that we go to a pre-K 4, a 5-8, and a 9-12. One of the things we heard loudly and clearly when we gave our community the opportunity to weigh in, we gave our faculty and staff the opportunity to weigh in, is not very many people really liked or appreciated or understood the mid-high concept, where you have 6th graders walking around in a high school with 11th and 12th graders. There is research on that, and what I would say is it's not conclusive, but for this district it didn't make sense. And so what we said is we're going to align this way. So again, over on the left side, increased learning opportunities, still under that heading of trade-ups, opportunities that we think should exist that do not exist right now for all kids. So STEM, let's talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Loads of information out there that tell us that kids who are graduating high school right now, who don't have very fundamental levels of STEM skills, those science skills, technology, engineering, and math skills, are already behind. That most jobs in most sectors require these skills. So we evaluated our district. A makerspace is a cutout space that is designated for STEM activity only. It's not a shared space. It's kind of like when I was going to school, they brought into the libraries the computer labs. So it was a dedicated space, and we used to sign up, and we got our day a week in the computer lab. So a makerspace is that. It is a dedicated space where we can teach our kids hands-on science, technology, engineering, and math skills so that we can stay up. We can get them equipped. We can transfer skills, and they can be ready for workforce, technical college, military, or career. Our proposal is that through the Pathway to Greatness, we move from 4%, only 2 of our schools in the elementary level, 54 schools, only 2 of them have these spaces. And that's not to say that our teachers aren't doing everything they can to bring STEM to our kids, but we need to take another step. We're going to move to 100%. Every single elementary will have a dedicated makerspace. I guess I have taken things for granted in my lifetime. I thought that every school, for a long time, had a full-time art, music, and PE teacher. So look at the number here. Let's talk about elementary. 54 elementary schools in our district today, right now. Only 18 of our 54 elementaries have those three things. Through Pathway to Greatness, we are saying every single elementary will have all three full-time every day. So I could talk about the fun behind that for kids, but I want to talk to you about something that is equally important, which is academic progress. Very clear that kids who have routine exposure to math or to art, music, and PE, routine exposure, that will show up in your math score, that will show up in your literacy rate, that will show up in your reading. It shows up everywhere. We only have 18 of our 54 schools who have those three things. So our commitment through this process is that every single elementary will have all three every day. Okay? And then we look at the same type of data for a full-time school librarian, 43% currently, and we want to double that to 84%. All right, let's keep going. So that was kind of an elementary look. Here is a secondary look of trade-ups, things that we're going to commit to bring to our schools. And these four things all came from our community input. So when we went out and surveyed and talked to people in auditoriums, these were four themes that came back to us overwhelmingly. It seems that we have a problem in our secondary schools with fully functioning science labs. Reports come to us that, hey, we don't even use the labs anymore because we don't have any equipment. We're using equipment the best we can, but it's 8, 9, 10 years old. We don't have kits to go along with lessons. And so our commitment is that there will be fully functioning science labs in every secondary school. You see the other two, the U.S. grant overcrowding, we talked about that. We have a model in Path A, B, C that takes as many as 600 kids off of U.S. grant's campus and redirects them, taking the pressure off, in many instances lowering class size and providing space. I want to point out the blue arrow there. One of our guiding principles has been that we look at things we're really doing well in the district by multiple measures. So meaning that it's not me looking at something and my opinion is that's a good thing. It is looking at success differently, multiple measures, and saying this is a pretty good thing. We're delivering education well. When we find those things, it makes sense to us that we increase those opportunities. So what this is suggesting is that our application schools, we increase the capacity and we expand the opportunity. Right now there are limitations at all of our application schools, and we want to expand those opportunities. We'll talk about that here in just a second as well. So another thing we said that we have got to pay attention to is having a full-time counselor, again, taking for granted, a full-time counselor in every elementary, at least one. Right now we have multiple examples of elementary schools where a counselor only comes to the school 1 day a week, 2 days a week. What we are suggesting is that our kids need more. And so the minimum is every elementary will have minimally one full-time counselor at every single school. And then we're going to change the ratio. We staff based on ratio. Currently we staff at 700 kids to 1, meaning when we hit 700, we give them a counselor. If they're below 700, we give them a fraction of a counselor. So we're going to change that number, and I told some of y'all that I talked to earlier wrong. We're going to move that to a 500 to 1. So the minimum is one counselor, but as our student body increases, we will bring additional counseling assistance to that school. Okay? Embrace OKC, a fantastic partnership that we kicked off 2 or 3 months ago, maybe longer. And it's a partnership between our school district and really the state of Oklahoma. So Commissioner of Health Terry White has said we're all in. Our compact partners have said, we're all in. How can we bring resources and assistance to your school district and help your kids? We know kids in Oklahoma City come from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. They have all kinds of different needs. And we as a district need to do a better job of meeting those needs. One of the better ways is to partner with this group so that we can deploy resources to our schools where kids need them. Our piece, or a piece of it that we need to own, is we need to hire more counselors for our kids, and we will do that. We're going to go 100% of our elementaries who have at least one counselor. At the top or near the top of every list of trade-ups, you'll find lower class sizes, and we're focusing primarily right now on the K-6, and we think across the board we can lower class sizes in K-6 on average at every school. The other two are interesting. It's an interesting pairing. You have assistant principals. If you can't read that at the bottom, then you have office clerks. Those are both characterized or categorized as staff in support of teachers. Our teachers, I think many would share this opinion, our teachers are the single most important factor in the life of a child outside of family. So in the school setting, it's the teacher who will connect most often, most deeply with our kids and have the opportunity to make the most difference. Right now, we've got our teachers running everywhere. Because when we approach a budget reduction, what we have said is, let's reduce assistant principals, let's reduce clerks. If you've ever been in the school business, you know that many times it's the clerk who makes the difference in that building on a given day. So we have reduced our clerks who do much of the work behind the scenes. When they're gone, who does the work? The teacher does. The teacher needs to be in front of kids, teaching kids. And so when we bring these things back, we are enabling and empowering our teachers to do more of what we need them to do. So this is a great concept. We have studied this for some time. It works in urban settings primarily, although it has worked elsewhere. It's called a transformational model. You can read it, but I'll tell you what the concept is. The concept is we find the most innovative, the most effective adults, principal, assistant principal, teachers that we can possibly find. We incentivize them. We say, if you will come and give us a 3-year commitment into our highest need schools, we will incentivize you through additional stipend money. So we're going to pick 5 to 7 schools, probably will be elementary schools, who have the greatest needs. And we're going to pair them or match them with a principal, an assistant principal, and a teacher in every grade level to come and help us move the needle for those kids. We will have a set of expectations. We will have metrics in place to measure, how are they doing, and we will redirect and adjust as necessary. But we're very excited about this trade-up for our kids. As it is successful, the way this works is we begin replicating best practices in all of our other schools. So excited to get that up off the ground. All right, here we go. So I know this is what we have been waiting for. We've come for this. So let me kick it off with this. This is just a quick summary of how we got to this place. We've talked about the data and ADG friends and trailblazers and navigators. For a year, we've been collecting data and analyzing and having conversation. And this gives you kind of a synopsis of some of those big things that we have done and intend to continue doing. All right. So impact for all paths. Remember that we're delivering this in an A, B, C. So in every path, I'm going to give you a chance to look at that. Elementary. In A, B, and C, those schools will be closed and repurposed. If you move down to middle and high school, can you read them out loud? Oh, yes. Okay, so I'm going to read them per your request. So elementary, closed to be repurposed in all 3 paths. Edgemere, Edwards, Gatewood, Green Pastures, Horace Mann, Johnson, North Highland, Oak Ridge, Pierce, Putnam Heights, Rancho Village, Sequoia. So again, regardless of the path that ends up being selected, A, B, or C, these are common in every path. Closed and repurposed. The next one you see is the only secondary school that is closed for repurpose in any of the pathways. Okay? So Centennial is that middle high school, and it will be closed for repurpose. Only secondary school in the 3 pathways. All right, let's keep going. There is additional impact, and so if you look at the first 5, Capitol Hill Elementary, Greystone, Martin Luther King, Mary Golda Ross, Parmalee. Those 5 elementaries will become middle schools. Okay? If you look at the next 2, West Nichols Hills, currently an elementary, becomes a 5th and 6th grade. Remember we talked about the 5-8 band and the importance of that middle school band? West Nichols Hills becomes the 5th and 6th, and then the current Belle Isle is the 7th and 8th of that 5 to 8 band. Okay, so we initially looked at Belle Isle. We know that we can't add the 5th grade to that building. So we go to West Nichols Hills, and it becomes the first 2 grades of that 5-8 band. And then we wrap up 7 and 8 at Belle Isle. Mid-high changes. And so those basically are telling you that we are moving away from the mid-high concept. Every high school will become a 9-12. I want to pay attention real quickly to that second bullet. Currently, we have Classen School of Advanced Studies that houses 6th through 12th graders. Next year, in all 3 paths, Classen School of Advanced Studies becomes Classen Middle School only. We immediately double our seats there. And then the high school portion of Classen comes to this building. So this becomes the Classen SAS High School. Let me talk about that real quickly because I know there are going to be questions about names. And we're going to approach that as we move forward through this process. We know that it's not simply the closure that causes us to be uncomfortable. It's what are you going to do with the name? Is there a way you can keep the Northeast name in it? And so we will continue having those conversations. The same thing holds true with West Nichols Hills as they move into that Belle Isle 5 through 8. So more information coming there. But these are the changes that we are considering reconfiguration. Stay open, but they house a different group, different grade bands of kids. All right, let's keep going. Okay, good, thank you. So let me back up because there's an important piece to that. So when we look at, let's take this for example, and this will help maybe understand how we've approached this. Kids who are currently at Northeast Academy, whether it's high school or middle school, if they choose to stay here and be a part of the class in high school, we will reserve seats for them. We're guaranteeing seats for them, okay? If they're here now and they're in middle school, we are going to, and they want to continue and they want to go to Classen, we're going to reserve seats at Classen, SAS Middle School for those kids who are currently here. Okay, so we'll have continued conversations about the application schools and reserving seats because the whole idea here is we want to get to a place where our application schools have more capacity for kids who want to attend, and they're in proximity in places where they're not. And so this addresses that. We know that there's going to have to be significant investment in a lot of these scenarios. If you look at some of these elementary schools that are being converted to middle, we know, I mean, questions we all have. Okay, what about bathrooms? We're going to take an elementary and turn it into a middle. Sinks have to be raised, etc. We need to look at athletic fields. We need to look at fine arts opportunities. Are they adequate? And so we've already started the process on addressing those things, and we'll continue to do that because we know upgrades are needed. As we move down the class and SAS pathway. We know that in many cases, at many of our schools that are being relocated or displaced, we know investment has to occur. So in a building like this, we know that SAS, in their 2 tracks, that they need things that do not exist adequately here. The same is true across our district. So our investment is going to be every attempt, every opportunity we can as a district to address those needs. And that'll come in the form of lots of conversation with school leaders, community leaders from those areas. Our intent is to upgrade. So that's where we are. Let's keep going. All right, so here's a final slide under this category. So our ADG team, facilities audit, they go around and they take the criteria and they spit data back out to us. One of the things they said about Emerson South, Seaworth, and the current building that Harding is in is either it's right now, it's not suitable for kids. We need to think about, not immediately, but pretty quickly, relocating those kids. So these are our buildings, and we're not talking about closing down a program. We appreciate each one of these programs, and they have a place in this district, a very important place in the district. So the conversation was, and I did a poor job of communicating this, that we have a group that we trust who have reported to us that we need to consider Emerson, Seaworth, and Harding, those buildings, and see through closures, is there a place that we can relocate kids? Okay, and so that was our intention from the very beginning. I look forward to talking to those school leaders to see what we need to do. Okay, let's talk about KIPP. KIPP currently, as I think many are aware, they operate out of FD Moon. But in all 3 pathways, FD Moon remains open as an elementary school. But to do it the way we need to do it, to increase the capacity for elementary kids in the boundary, we've got to find another place for KIPP. So again, those conversations are coming. It's a relocation, kids who are housed in one building to another building. Okay, we're not talking about doing away with programs. Okay, all right, let's keep going. So here is a visual of these choice options we talked about, the application schools. Right now, we are limited by capacity and by access, proximity. Where in the district are these options located? So let's start at the top. Right now, Belle Isle operates 6-8. We're going to expand it to 5-8. And we're going to add another school to the mix. And so now we have 2 schools. We've increased capacity for kids who live up in that northern band. Middle, right now, we are at 1,000 student capacity, give or take, at class and SAS for 6th graders through 12th graders. Here, we move the high school kids to this building, and we immediately double, give or take, the capacity at the middle school. So additional kids in our district who want to attend, now they have space to attend. At the high school, I mean, you have seen the size of this building. Currently we have, and I'm giving a rounded number, about 500 or so high school kids. We move the high school programming to this building, and we immediately at least double, probably closer to triple the capacity for kids in our district who say, families in our district who say, I want to take advantage of that particular application school. So it addresses capacity and it addresses proximity. Oh, I missed the last one, I'm sorry. Oh, and that's a brand new one. So Southeast currently, Southside addresses 9th through 12th graders. They have a cap on their enrollment. What we're saying is let's increase that cap a little bit to get closer to capacity. And let's do one more thing. Let's add an application middle school. So Parmalee Elementary becomes an application middle that feeds into Southeast. This is one of the ways that we propose we can take some of the pressure off of U.S. Grant, which again, loud and clear, that was a concern of our community. So no matter where you live, north, central, south, you now have capacity and you now have proximity where if I choose to apply for one of these schools, It's closer to where I live, and the capacity is increased. All right, so we're now going to go through our feeder patterns. So let me give you a look at that. This is path A. So what we've tried to do is make very strong feeder patterns, so there is no doubt if I go to this elementary, I'm going into this middle and I'm going into this high school. Capitol Hill feeder pattern in path A. Here's the Douglas feeder pattern in path A. In addition to elementary, notice that Martin Luther King, which up until this point has been elementary, becomes the middle in the Douglas High School feeder pattern. John Marshall feeder pattern. Greystone Elementary becomes the feeder middle school in this path. Northwest Classen, so Taft, long-standing middle, Marigold to Ross, elementary reconfigured to middle. U.S. Grant, and Star Spencer High School feeder pattern. So let me spend just a minute here. Early on, we made the decision based on all the data, all the input we were getting, that we were going to have to treat the Star Spencer feeder pattern a little differently for a variety of reasons. So we took the approach that we want to look at them and address this as a small independent school district and approach it that way. So let's look at them in isolation and see what we can do. What we like about this is, similar to many small districts, we are going to keep kids together from the time they enter school in pre-K all the way through graduation. So if you look at the Willowbrook, it's a pre-K through 1 early childhood center. Every parent that wants to take advantage of that in the community, in that feeder pattern, pre-K through 1, they go to that school. As they move from first grade into second, they go to Telstar, onto Rogers, onto Star Spencer. So that's pathway A. So here's a summary. Total school closures to be repurposed sits at 15. All right, let's look at path B. Back to the same format that you just saw, but some changes in feeder pattern. So here's the Capitol Hill feeder. The Douglas High School feeder pattern. John Marshall. Northwest Classen, U.S. Grant, and Star Spencer. So for those that aren't aware, in the Star Spencer feeder pattern, right now there are 6 schools. In every pathway, that is reduced to 4. We keep 4 schools open, and then we reconfigure 3 different ways. So there's a summary. Like A, we're at 15 facilities that are going to be closed and then repurposed. And then some changes in feeder pattern. And here in a minute, I'll give this in a side-by-side look so that you can see clearly what the differences are. Sorry about that. Yeah, give me just a second. Okay, let's move to path C. So A and B have quite a few similarities. C is quite a bit different than A and B. And we'll see that here in just a second. But same format, again, changing up feeder patterns. So A and B, we had 15 as the number. That top bullet closed and repurposed here. We moved to 18. And then you see some of the differences here between A and B. So side by side, A, B, and C, you see the total number of schools to be closed and repurposed, and some of the significant differences between and among A, B, and C. Here's a side-by-side looking at the feeder differences. And then side-by-side, the trade-ups, the things we're going to bring back to our schools as a commitment. So really the takeaway from this slide is the 7 bullets in A, B, and C are identical. In B, the reinvestment bank, so as we close a school, we don't pay utilities, we don't pay insurance, we don't pay operational costs. We move that money into an investment bank, and then we deploy it back out to get the trade-ups we're talking about. So the important piece of this is without the closures and us stopping on utility payments and insurance and operational payments, we can't get to these trade-ups that we believe are so important. So it takes one to get the other. So path B, we get a little more investment dollar. And we can then go back out and say, what's our priority? In this case, we say, let's go get more nurses. We know the need exists in our schools. Let's spend that additional money in pathway B and go get more nurses. In path C, logically, this makes sense. In the other two, we're closing 15. In C, we're closing 18, so there's more investment dollar. So in addition to that whole list, more nurses, now we can go and reinvest into teachers and begin lowering class sizes even more. So the question, one of the questions is, how do we select A, B, and C? If it's just about building up your reinvestment bank, we would choose C. But a question we wrestle with is the money we get in C worth all these additional things that have to happen? More changes in feeder pattern, more school closures, more disruption. So it's kind of a balancing act to narrow down from 3 to 1. Let me take just an opportunity here to talk about A, B, and C. So this is a fact. Regardless of whether we choose A, B, or C, with all of our school feeder patterns, all of what you've seen, leaving Star Spencer feeder pattern to the side, we can choose A, B, or C with all the other schools. We can choose A, B, or C with the Star Spencer feeder pattern, and those are interchangeable, if that makes sense. So conceivably, we might choose A out of that first group of schools, but we could choose B out of the Star Spencer feeder pattern. Those are interchangeable. Okay, and I want to make sure we're clear on that. Okay, repurposing. So we've talked a little bit about when a school closes, we repurpose. So we have been having conversations for months leading up to tonight. And we've been having conversations with, here's a short list. City County Health has said, we would love to take at least 2 schools right now and bring clinic opportunities in. So an eye doctor, a dentist, medical, counseling services, any number of partners to occupy 2 schools that you decide to close. That's a huge gain. So instead of these boarded up schools, fences around them, padlocks on the front door, we repurpose buildings into these things. We've had conversations with our Head Start group, our birth to 3-year-old programs, who have said, we're in. We'd like to have further conversations about maybe regionally locating birth to 3-year-old programs in schools that you decide to close. So another win. We know, I think it's a known fact in our school district, by the time many of our kids get to 3rd grade, they're already a year and a half behind with their reading and literacy skills. A birth to 3-year-old program that we can include more kids in will make a difference with that statistic. So we're really excited about some of these opportunities. And we have a longer list. We have all kinds of counseling services, mentoring programs, lots of people who are very interested in occupying schools so that we add value to our neighborhoods. And then we know there are a number of questions. This is a very short list that we are beginning to document as theme questions. We have multiple people asking the same questions. And so we expect to get a lot more questions, a lot more input as the days go on over the next week and a half. We've set up a parking lot, simply meaning that as you ask questions, we will put them aside, we will research, respond to the questions, and then turn them back out on the website so that every question that is asked will have an answer so that you can track this and keep up to speed with this process. So one of the things that I've been asked a number of times that I want to comment on real quickly is, so we opened school in August, we've closed schools, we've reconfigured schools, we're done. And the answer to that is no. This is a step 1 of an ongoing transformational process. We know we need to track what we do. We need to be sure that our targets and our goals that we established, that we're meeting them. And if we're not, what do we do about it? We tweak, we make adjustment, we bring more resources, we do whatever we need to do to keep us on track. But the other piece of that is we're going to begin having conversations this year about what are some other significant trade-ups that we can bring to our schools. And that conversation could take the form of a bond authorization where we may need, we need additional technology in our classrooms. We need textbooks, we need equipment, we need supplies. We may need, as we see this progress, we may need to build another school. We may need to add a wing to several schools. So we want to have that conversation about what is the next step. How can we get additional resources to our kids and to our families and to our schools? And then just 21 and on, that continue evaluation of how we're doing and making adjustments as we go. So we started this back in the summer of 18. We're coming around that bottom curve. Tonight, here we are. Tomorrow, January 23rd through the 30th, community engagement. And then a next big milestone is February 19th, if you look there on our timeline. On February 19th, right back here, I will propose a single pathway to the board. There will be no vote, but they will consider that single pathway. We'll return in March on the 4th, and the board will vote on that single pathway. So let's talk real quickly, and then we're going to engage the board in a conversation. Let's talk about input. You've seen several slides here that talk about future input, that we're going back out to the community, we're soliciting input. We're going to talk to the board tonight. They're going to give input. So what is it? What's the input that we're looking for? And so I want to be clear on this for you all, and just for those who are paying attention and listening. To this point, the input has been to help us develop these pathways. We need the data. We need the input. We need the conversation to help us develop the pathways. Input moving forward is going to help us determine which pathway. So the questions that we'll talk about, and I know more than what I'm proposing, but I need to know, does A make more sense than B or C, and why? What's strong about one or the other? Compare them. Where is there a weakness that is a deal breaker for me? We need to get to the one. So the input that we're going to be receiving really will help us get from 3 to 1. That does not mean that something might not be said in a community meeting, a board member, somebody that we have not thought about before, and we need to incorporate into a pathway, or maybe all 3 pathways. But this is a very refined 3 pathways. It is the culmination of a year's worth of data analysis, lots of conversations, combing through the anecdotal and the numbers. And so these 3, one of these 3 will be the pathway that I bring to the board on the 19th. So your input is critical, but the input in the form of strengths, weaknesses, compare the 3, which one sounds like the best bet for our kids and for our future. Okay. All right, with that, actually I have one more slide just to bring it all the way back around. There is no getting around, board, that this process has been difficult. It's been difficult for many who are looking at a school where, you know, that's the hub of a community, that's the hub of the neighborhood. My kid goes to that school and comes home happy. And we are sending a message that we're going to be closing schools and repurposing them. It is disruptive, and we know that. But we balance that out with the good things that we are going to bring back to our schools, knowing that those good things, those positive things, are going to make a difference for all of our kids. We're addressing the equity issue where, depending on where we live, we may or may not have these resources or opportunities that other kids have. Unacceptable. And so to get to this place where we know that we're influencing the life of every child makes a difference to us. And while difficult, and I know it is, uncomfortable, lots of questions, we believe in the process, we believe in the outcome, and I'll leave it at that and hand it back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. McDaniel. Can everybody hear me back in the back before we start talking? Okay, great, thank you. All right, well, thank you for that presentation, and let's go ahead and get started. Ms. Torres, do you have any questions? We'll just kind of go down the line here. Any comments or questions?
I do. Let me look at this map really quick.
You're going to have to talk in the microphone, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Yes. Madam Chair, can I take a couple of minutes to look through this before we start
Absolutely.
on the questions?
Absolutely.
Please take your conversations to the lobby. The meeting is convening.
All right. Okay. Welcome back. So we, board, we went ahead and invited up Beth and Rebecca Kay and Jean and Scott for any questions you might have regarding their specific specialties. And Ms. Torres, are you ready?
I am. Thank you very much. Superintendent McDaniel, thank you. That was a very thorough and very thoughtful explanation, as for a lot of us who are not professional educators to understand how and where we came up with that. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thank you.
I'm very encouraged that this process has taken us to a point where many of our concerns were heard, such as the overcrowded in Southside schools, the need for additional space, and the need for access to our students, for our students to have access to more advanced programming, such as the class and SAS model in South Oklahoma City, for those families that are not comfortable, for whatever reason, having to commute over to the other side of town. So thank you very much for all the work that went into that. My question at this point, because I'm very encouraged by this, is I would say I'm not the only one. I'm going to say that there's several people within our district and within our community who have heard promises of these trade-ups for years. We are going to get this. We need you to sacrifice a little bit right now because we are going to provide that. How? And then we come to the point to where those promises were broken. How can this board make sure that we get the necessary information in a timely manner? How often will we be getting that information in order for us to be able to hold the district accountable to say to, if I'm saying that I'm going to get a functioning 21st century science lab in every middle school, we're looking at adding a number of middle schools that are not currently middle schools. So when my baby will be in middle school this coming year, I need to make sure that he's going to have a science lab. How, as a board, are we going to be able to get that information? When will we have that information? And how will we then be able to hold the district accountable?
So thank you, Gloria. When I first came, one of the things that you made very clear to me was this very notion that our community, we are tired of same old, same old. You told us this, and then you gave me some excuse later as the reason why we didn't get it, whether it's budget reduction or whatever it was. So equally, about the same time, you asked me to begin creating reporting protocols, processes that we as a staff could come back to you as a board and say, rather than waiting until the end of the game and then making an excuse to you, we have milestones, we have check-ins. This is no different than that. So each of these things that we've laid out to you, we've made it very public that we are committing to these things. We now need to continue the reporting cycle. So whether it is every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever you choose, our staff has a pretty good idea of how we want to do that. We need to bring reporting back to you. Where are we in the process? What do we lack to be complete with X, Y, or Z, whatever it is? And so I think the sale here tonight is no different than any other sale that we've heard. It's in productivity, it's in outcome. Do we follow through? And we've got to report out to you regularly on major initiatives so that you can hold us accountable to that. That's what we expect, and those are the plans that we're developing.
So when do you think you'll be able to have that type of timeline or that process prepared?
We're about 90% there right now. So fast forward to March 4th, we're in here, the board takes a vote, it's a favorable vote. On March 5th, we actually begin implementation of everything you saw. So with that, our Trailblazer group has suggested, hey, let's create scorecards so that at any time you request it, so it's not a 6-month report out, we have a scorecard on each major initiative. And we can report out via a scorecard to our board. So the metrics we're going to use, how do we know if it's successful or not? How do we know that we're on track? If we're not, what are we doing about it? Just those educational principles that we understand are important as we move this forward. So really the metrics, the scorecard, we need to do some development, but the concept of reporting out, we're close right now. Okay.
And so,
and just to add to that, what the Trailblazers discussed in the committee was really focused on student outcomes. So to have elements of the scorecard or health report related to equity that were about those items you talked about, like the stuff, did we check the box on doing what we promised? But also to have reporting, regular reporting on equity measures among the schools based on things that are really important to our community, not just test scores.
Thank you.
So, for example, our elementary schools we have a number of elementary schools that are being recommended to become middle schools. There are facility needs that will cost us to make those upgrades. Do we expect these to be ready August 1?
Great question. So I'm going to start, and then Scott, if you want to jump in, you can. So we have access to old bond funds. So we meet the obligation of a bond fund. What we told the voters we do it, and we have bond funds that are available to us that are discretionary funds. So there are many things that are bond eligible. We can pay for this with a bond fund. So Scott and his crew have already started the prioritized lists. In order to start school, here's a list of things that are non-negotiable, have to have these things. Here's another list that he and his teams will go out and say, we can start school without this, but we've got to get this finished very quickly. So priority 1, priority 2, and so on, so that progress is being made even after we start school. So we know important things to middle school kids are what? Fine arts, athletics, co-curriculars, and we know that many of our elementary schools are not right now ready to go. So with some of our partners in the community, under Scott's direction, on March 5th, we will begin starting our priority list and making those changes as necessary to provide spaces for our kids. That would be a priority 2 list. We know we can start school without fully finished fields, but we know that that's got to be a work in progress, and we got to get to it very quickly. Other things are priority 1. So if I'm in an elementary now, and that becomes a middle. I mentioned this during our presentation. What are the things that come to mind? Toilets, sinks, things that were built for an elementary age kid that we've got to take care of right now. And so we look at that priority 1 list and we make those changes as school starts. We look at things like spaces within the building. One of the things that these guys have done, the audit, walked the buildings, I've walked the buildings, and we know that elementary cafeterias are situated differently than what we might expect in a middle school, whether it's the furniture, the tables, the chairs. So that would be a priority 1 thing. We've got to address furniture. We've got to create whatever additional space we can for bigger bodies, more kids to occupy these spaces. So it's really a prioritized approach where we have priority 1, non-negotiable, this will be done, and then moving forward from there.
Okay, the second part to this is preparing our staff to make changes. So if we have elementary teachers who have been teaching the 5th grade elementary model, how are we supporting them to transition into the secondary middle school model?
So one of the trade-ups that we believe is essential is targeted professional development. We do a good job with professional development, just by and large, provide some opportunity. But here's an example of a targeted professional development. So things like behavioral management. How do I manage a classroom full of kids who are a different age than what I'm used to? So things like that, we expect to have full-blown professional development plans in place. We already do for the most part. This becomes a very much more targeted approach. So whatever the needs are that our teachers verbalize to us as we're transitioning into new schools with different kids, our plan is to meet those needs through professional development.
I think that's it for right now.
Excellent. All right, Mark.
Okay. I want to thank those that are still here, our trailblazers and our navigators, for the time that you spent in helping develop this plan. I want to thank our superintendent and district staff. I think this has been a really transparent, community-driven process that's went smoothly. And I thank you guys for your work. I really have just 2 questions. One, the first question is, and I've received a lot of feedback, as I'm sure others have, is moving the 5th grade to that middle school model. And I can tell you, as someone who's not an educator, I would much rather have my 5th grader in a building with 8th graders than my 6th grader in a building with 12th graders. But do we have some research and best practices that back up that this 5th to 8th grade model is a successful model elsewhere?
Sure, let me take a stab at it. I know you have more than I, but so there are a couple pieces to this that we look deeply at, and I'm sure that Rebecca can give you more detail, but generally, two things. One, if you look at the research that exists in our own district, we know that anywhere from 25 to 30% of our kids leave us every year between 5th and 6th grade. When you move 5th graders into a 4-band situation, 5th through 8th grade, you're giving them 4 years of culture, 4 years of families moving through life together, through school together. I get to know my principal. I get to know the teachers in the building as a family and as a student. So that 25 to 30% is reduced, and we keep more of our kids because they feel attachment to their school. So that's an internal piece of research. The other thing we know is that 5th graders, much different than 4th graders and below, are ready for much of the rigor that comes with a middle school setting. They're not middle schoolers, but by and large, 5th graders are ready to learn at higher levels. So when you put a 5th grader in a building with a 6th, 7th, and 8th grader who are modeling now for them, by and large, and for the most part, you treat them in that building more like an elementary kid, but you challenge them at higher levels, and they get to see modeling take place. What's it like to be a 6th grader? 6th graders begin moving a little bit. We transition them into 7th and 8th grade, where we know that they change classes routinely. So 5th grade, we treat them kind of like an elementary kid, but we bring the academic rigor, and now they're in a modeling pattern where that translates to 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. So those are two pieces. I know you've got more.
That's pretty good.
I mean, I can talk about this as much as you would like, but I think one thing that I would like to add to what Dr. McDaniel said is that also think about the way that teachers get supported, because a lot of times what happens at the upper elementary grades is we already have departmentalization happening in our elementary schools, because by the time kids get to the 5th grade content, it's important that the teachers be more skilled, especially in math and science. And so we see that happening in our elementary schools already, and so moving those kids and their teachers in particular into a setting where they'll be able to collaborate with other teachers that are doing high level content is going to be, we think, good instructionally for our kids. 5th graders, like Dr. McDaniel said, are developmentally closest to 6th graders. They're most similar. But we know that because of some of the psychological changes that happen, the cognitive changes that happen in the 6th grade, that there's a lot of research about how that's a particularly difficult year for kids to transition to being kind of the low man on the
6th grade year.
The 6th grader. So moving it down to the 5th grade, and we've been talking about what the instructional model will be. We don't plan to kind of throw the kids into a whole independent scheduling system. We expect that it'll be more of a transition where there are less schedule class changes for the 5th and 6th graders, and we'll be able to transition them into a more independent schedule for the 7th and 8th grade in that one school setting. And you'll notice in a lot of the maps that what happens is actually the school zones for the middle schools get smaller. So whereas right now you have 9 schools coming together in Webster and those kids are only together for 2 years, I mean, that's a recipe for having a really big challenge with creating school culture. This is a smaller number of schools coming together for 4 years, and that they'll be able to build more community.
And I think I know the answer to this, but the 4th graders going to 5th grade, we will have opportunities and open houses, and if it's an application school, we'll have a process where they can apply once this is implemented, correct?
Absolutely. We've already started drafting what that might look like, but just conceptually it's going to look like open houses, even in the spring, where as these changes are made, we give opportunity for kids whose school might be closed and their families to come visit the school where they will be reassigned. We're looking at Saturdays, come and walk the building. And then as we get closer to school, some of the typical open house, meet the teacher. Once we get staff and leaders in place, we want to do everything we can to make the transition as good and positive as possible. But yes, we've started those timelines and opportunities.
And I've got one more question, and then I'll be quiet. And this really relates to our application schools, and I'm going to talk about the one I'm most familiar with, which is class and SAS. And I've done a little research before this meeting just to wrap my mind around it. I know that the closest thing that you could compare what we're doing to would be Booker T in Tulsa or Booker T Washington in Dallas. I know Tulsa has, I think, 1,300 plus kids. Dallas has about 950 kids. ACT, SAT scores roughly the same. They actually have a higher student-to-teacher ratio in those other two schools than we do. But my question is, are we prepared as we take more kids into this pattern, which is something I've been for 2 years? Are we prepared to make sure that we maintain those high standards and that rigor as we're bringing kids in?
So the easy answer is yes. We've also looked at those numbers and those models in addition to others. And so currently in the application process, there are criteria, qualifications to get into a particular track of the school. And so we expect those to remain, but we'd like to look at adding additional tracks. Right now, as you know, most of us know, we have visual performing arts track, and we have the International Baccalaureate track. And so we're looking at maybe a college and career track or a technical track or something that broadens the spectrum. But the high standards have to remain. We're not talking about watering down anything. We're simply talking about expanding the opportunity that kids have from various parts of the city, but maintaining our high standards. And so that's the expectation. We also have lots to do, as I mentioned, to provide spaces for kids who are moving around. We talked about bathrooms. We talked about cafeterias. In many of our specialty schools like this one, we've got some upgrade to do. We know outside we need to do everything from signage to landscaping to work on our athletic fields. In here, we probably need some lighting overhaul. We need spaces where kids can go and continue their dance program, mirrors and hardwood floors. So across the district, not limited to application schools, we've got a lot of work to do to bring up to the standard. This is the beauty of reinvestment. And we don't get to these things without the hard part, which we saw this evening. Great question. I appreciate that.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth?
It's one of these hard places to be. I'm third on the totem pole here, and I've already had some of the questions that I had targeted to answer. So if I were over there with Paulie is, well, then I probably even have a lot more to add to it. Because so yes, I would like to kind of piggyback on even what Gloria has said as a starter. You've talked a little bit about the accountability part, but you know, my concern is not only the accountability measurement part, but how do we go in and to tweak the areas that we need to take care of on an aggressive, you know, time period. Because we know that even in this process that we have some children in our district that's 2 and 3 grade levels behind. I know the different programs that we have had in the past that we have a year or two down the way that they did not work, but we did not go in aggressively, quickly go in and readjust those programs to meet the needs of the students. So for this to work, I truly believe that it's very important that we have a tracking to see where our students are on a regular. I know that we had the benchmarks in the schools at one point, and how well they were being used, I don't know, but even if we were to use something such as that, to where that we can make sure that we're on top of what it is that we're trying to accomplish with the pathway to greatness. So, I'm just going to leave that with that. The next thing that I wanted to talk about again is that when you put me third behind some good questions here, it kind of stimulate my brain and thinking. As we're talking about even the moving the class and SAS here and as an application school and for the school that's based upon arts and others, well then I know that even with Northeast that this was the intent to be an engineering science and engineering school. So if we're going to bring these, and I know that when it was an application school that lots of the families chose to come here for that particular purpose. So if we're going to bring them together, to me that's just another opportunity for our students. And so when we're considering, you know, if this is something that we decide to do, is that we also consider even the existing school and the track that they, you know, chose for this school and that the district chose for this school based upon what they wanted for this school. So that's the next thing. Another thing, have you considered that in the grade band, that for parents, and an example of the parents, and for an example for that, is that I know that that the pre-K through first, and then the second, I believe, through fourth, that there are some parents that live in the community, and that their students are walkers. So they are responsible for making sure that each of their students get to the school. So if we add into it to where we have multiple schools, well then, you know, we need to make sure that we consider the fact of them being able to get this student to school A, this group of their students to school B, and if it's necessary to others. So that's something that's very important that we take in consideration as well.
So if I could comment on that, and Scott again jump in here, but one of the things we've paid close attention to, had lots of conversations about, I know Scott has with his transportation department, is can that be another trade-up at a higher level? So we currently transport lots of kids. How many thousands of kids do we? So 10,000 kids a day we transport. You know, we use kind of a 1.5 mile rule, which is a state law that we don't have to provide transportation if you live within a 1.5 miles of the school. But in many cases, we still do provide that transportation. This may be one of those situations, Ruth, that we've got to reevaluate it. Similarly, we look at Class and SAS, and that may be something that we have to dig deeper into. How can we get kids who live in a particular neighborhood and attend the middle school part of SAS, but maybe are worried about getting here? We do some low-level, some transportation, but can we up our game a little bit there? So it's a full reevaluation of how we do transportation, and can we make it work better? So I appreciate those comments.
Okay, and one more. Yep. I want to first, and I apologize, I did not thank you and your staff and ADG for the good job that you've done as far as getting the presentation and presented it, you know, to us as a board and also to the community. One thing that I'm also looking at is that is the trade-ups. Again, sometimes that people, we don't understand, and I'm going to say that I didn't understand necessarily a year ago, a year and a half ago, about what are split classes. How does split classes affect students that are already struggling? In our class, and in just a minute, I'm going to have you to finish answering that question, but even in our district right now, we have some students that are 2 and 3 grade levels behind. And as you explained what split classes are, well, this is a definite trade-up for having the opportunity to have our children have a teacher that's dedicated to their grade level, opposed to trying to struggle in so I'm going to ask you if you will answer that as a trade-up and how that's going to really affect. And for the last, not so I won't have to say anything, this is one of the things that for the last 2.5, 3 years that I have been really pounded in, and Paula, she says that Ruth can't say a sentence without using equity.
I was just wondering about that.
Yes, and so in this for me is a time to where that I am so pleased to be a part of what real equity looks like. What equity in education looks like is what's been presented here, to where that every student, no matter where they are, have the same opportunity to have a good education experience. So
let me respond to the split classes. So for those who don't understand exactly what that is, it's where, because of our staffing, because of our budget, for whatever reason, we are forced to group kids that are in 2 different grades into one single class with a single teacher. Now, in fairness, there are educational models out there where this is a good thing. So if you do it strategically with certain educational models where you group kids based on ability, for example, we're not saying that in all situations split classes is the wrong thing to do. What we're suggesting is that when you're forced to do it because of other variables, it is probably not a good thing. So when I came in here last year, I think we had, you guys probably remember, 52, 53 classrooms that were split classrooms across our district. So I'm glad you mentioned this because it is a significant trade-up for families, for teachers and kids. We will not have a single trade-up that is a single split class that is a forced split class in our district. Okay, so that is a trade-up that I think everybody can embrace. We will leave flexibility for schools who can demonstrate to us that this is part of a strategic educational model. Talk to us about it, get our chief academic officer to sign off on it, and we will then support that. But as far as a forced situation, we've got to put second and third graders or fifth and sixth graders in a single class together and try and teach that is extremely challenging for our teachers. So I'm glad you brought that up. Big time trade-up.
And I just wanted to say that in that situation that I'm sure that there are those places to where that it could be beneficial for instance, a second grade student that is that's working above a second grade level, and to where that a third grade student that is below, to where that they can help each other in that area. But however, that in our district that it has been more so for split classes has been placed into the schools to where that the students are at greatest need and that they're already behind, so that definitely cannot be a trade up or cannot be good for our students in those particular schools.
Fantastic point. Thank you, Ruth.
Excellent. Thanks, Ruth. Jace?
Thank you, Chairperson Lewis. I want to say, first of all, that last year I completed, well, I guess the beginning of this school year, I completed visiting all 72 of our schools, and it became really apparent that we couldn't keep doing what we were doing. I live on the south side, worked on the south side for about 15 years, and as we know, a lot of our schools on the south side are bursting at the seams, and I just kind of assumed that that was the norm everywhere. And as I went other places, I saw buildings that were, you know, less than a third full, and some people might think, hooray for them, but I felt bad for kids in those places because they were not having access to the same things that kids at overcrowded schools were having access to. They didn't have a full-time PE teacher because the number of their students. So it was really apparent we couldn't keep doing things the same way, as I came on the board, this conversation had already started and didn't really know what I was walking into, but I want to say that I've been really pleased about the process. I think that this is a good plan. I did the same thing that all of you did when I got the paper or saw the slides. We all have a strong affinity to certain schools. We're deeply connected to certain schools. I am too. And so I did the same thing. I looked on the lists to see, oh man, one of my schools right there. And that's for many people, I'm afraid, where it would stop, but I'm pleased tonight to see that you presented the trade-ups before we got to that, because once I got past my personal affinity to certain schools, and I could see what all children in our district could have access to, I became really excited about this really quickly. And I want to just mention a few of the things I'm excited about before I ask my questions. The reason I can say that it's a good plan is because every single school is touched by this plan. There's not a school that, well, we're going to carve them out and leave them alone. Every school goes through some pain of change, whether it's their grade band, and then certainly those that will be set for closure. That's a painful experience. But we all go through the pain together to experience the trade-ups together. And so there's not just pockets that are picked out for closure and everyone else is not touched by this plan. We all experience the pain together to go through the trade-ups together. One thing that's really exciting to me is the middle school model of 5th to 8th grade. I've spent most of my volunteer years in our district volunteering in middle schools, and for a lot of my experiences there, it felt like middle school was kind of the forgotten stepchild, or, you know, the stop between elementary school and high school. Just, you're there for a couple years and then we'll move you on. There were no deep connections, and it's hard to build school culture. And so looking at having 4 years in what I believe to be some of the most important developmentally for our students, I'm very excited about that. I'm excited that the numbers in those 5th to 8th grade middle schools seem to be manageable, especially in 2 of the plans. The third thing I'm really excited about is greater access to application schools, especially for students on the south side. Having Parmalee become an application middle school becomes an opportunity that our south side students, very few of them have had an opportunity to take advantage of, like a Belle Isle Middle School, for example. Very excited about that. And of course, super excited about the trade-ups. When I look at, and I don't know if I just tuned out before, but when I look to see that every elementary school has a full-time counselor tonight, our conversations with the mental health task force, like that, we know that's a great need. So I hope that we as a community can get past, I don't know if that's the right word, but get past our personal affinity to a school, to a building, and we can embrace what all of our students across the district could experience as a trade-up. Now, my 2 questions. The first question is, and I'll just tell you both of them. In Path C, what is the, and I don't know if we know this or not, but what is the estimated additional financial impact with the closures in this pathway? And then my other question is, in the 5 to 7 transformational schools that you mentioned, I know you said that we'll be using data to identify those schools. My question is, we may identify schools today that are open that would be identified as the most in need, and those schools may be closed in one of these paths. Would we be looking at, would the money follow the students who are in need, is my question. Whereas like today, if we identified a school that you would say, no, they're not in need according to the set of data, next year due to some boundary changes or some closures, some new student population may be entering their school, would we be looking to have money follow and maybe go into a school that wouldn't necessarily be identified this year as a transformational school? I don't know if that even made sense, but it did in my mind.
So let's talk about transformational model just generally. The transformational schools will be selected after we select a path. So there's not going to be a situation where we close a school, we say, oh my gosh, it was the most in need, let's open it back, it's transformational. So what's left, we will then select transformational from there. You want to take a stab at this? Okay, the money, yeah, let's talk about the money. So Path B will bring in reinvestment dollars about $500,000 more than Path A. Path C will bring in additional $1 million on top of that. Okay, so 1.5 from C to A in additional reinvestment dollars. So as we're taking input on what do we like, well, clearly one of the things we like is $1.5 million C versus A. So then really we've got to go back and look at, okay, what are we giving up, losing, closing, reconfiguring between the two? So the bang has to be worth the buck. Now let me go back to transformational, because I'm not sure I understood the gist of the question.
Should I ask it differently maybe?
Please do.
So I understand that we would not reopen a school that we would identify as in need of being labeled as transformational. My question is, and I don't want to pick a name off the list because I don't know data, but I'll just randomly pick the first one on the list. Edgemere Elementary is being identified for closure. If this year we would have said Edgemere is in the most need of transformation, well, those students from Edgemere are going to go to another school next year because their school's being closed. Would that data follow them to their new school, and could we potentially identify a school that would have not otherwise been identified because of the new student population?
Great question, I understand you now. So we're going to look at 2 pieces of data. One is the designations that the State Department of Education gives to our schools. So you may remember reading the paper that some schools are focus schools, they receive a designation based on performance at that school. So we'll use that to inform us. But the second piece is what you're talking about. So we want to look and see what the population of kids at a school is moving forward and take that into account as well. We'll lean heavily on designations, but we'll also take into account what the makeup of the school is moving forward. So 2 pieces of information, and then we will make decisions based on those 2 things. And I'm sure there's probably other.
One, I think that there's sort of 2 questions that you're asking. So on the transformation schools, in addition to the designations, we're looking at a whole lot of different data points that are important. So test scores and growth are important, but not the only thing. We're also looking at things like teacher retention. We're looking at suspensions, chronic absenteeism, a whole lot of different data points across the board. We know a lot about our kids' psychological distress, for example. We're ranking all of our schools and looking for schools that are consistently showing up in the bottom across the board. So that's how we will be going about identifying those transformation schools. But then I think in addition to that, we have some schools that will be taking students from schools that that will be very likely to be on the state's priority list. And we're already sort of talking about how we will direct support to those students. I think it's pretty unlikely. I don't think any of the schools get overwhelmed, like the school will change so significantly that it would shift from being not a state designation school to being a state designation school, though that won't happen. The state will only issue a designation list every 3 years under their new plan. But we are very conscious of kids' needs and our equity policy, which we are trying very hard to follow, will kind of dictates that we need to make sure that we're assessing the needs of those kids and getting resources to follow them, whether or not it is a designation school or is on our transformation list.
Thank you. Jace, does that finish up? All right, Charles?
Well, I want to start with, I appreciate you. I do have a few questions. I have a question about my particular district, but I have some general questions, and the questions may seem like simple questions, but a lot of people may want to know. So as far as the public meetings are concerned, the format being laid out, I guess you'll give a presentation and there'll be question and answers. Can you give me just a brief synopsis about, how engaged will the community be in answering those questions? And
okay, good. So we will present the same presentation that we saw tonight, leading off with the video. I'll walk people through the same thing we did similarly to the way we did it tonight, and then we will have 2 microphones set up, I think is the way we did it last time. And people can approach the microphone and ask their question, make their suggestion, and I will stay until the last question is asked. Last round, I think we were at Star Spencer for 3.5 hours. We were at Douglas for 2.5. It was kind of a mixed bag. The important piece is that we hear what our community has to say, and so we'll stay till the last question is asked. Really, nothing is off limits. There is feedback that is more important right now. Looking at what we see here, what do we like, what are the strengths, why A over B, C, why C over B, A, how do we get from 3 to 1? That's information that's going to be priceless to us. So we are looking forward to engaging with our community. So there's really no time limit, and the format is similar to what we had tonight presentation-wise, and then we open the mic.
Okay, and with the variations in the schools, we're consolidating schools, repurposing schools. I talk a lot about in-school suspension, a structured discipline policy.
Right.
So, when we, let's say we have kids from Wilson, I guess, feeding in the MLK or in different schools like that. So, if we are trying not to suspend kids that are disruptive, the problem is if you keep them in the classroom setting, then they become disruptive to the kids. So I always advocate that we have quality in-school suspension and detention programs that work. And my hope and my goal is not just in the presentation of this, but we also, I'm sure you're all working on it, the implementation. So when we have a plan where we're changing the formula of how our schools operate, we need to make sure that we have a structured discipline policy so that that school teacher can know and have the confidence that their administration will handle the situation and not necessarily suspend the kid or set the child up for being suspended in the future. So I would hope that you all would look at that. And also, we have a lack of remediation programs within our school district as well. So I didn't know if you want to speak on that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you could hear the question, but really talking about, and Charles, kind of correct me if I don't summarize right, but we're really talking about blending cultures. And we have schools coming into a building that are coming from 2, 3, maybe 4 different cultures. And how do we blend cultures so that expectations are consistent? We have discipline problems. We want to make sure that the teacher and school leaders are addressing the problems. We've talked a little bit about, what does an in-school suspension program or an intervention program in a school setting look like at an elementary school, in a middle school? Are there ways that we can intervene in a building, establish expectations, create culture as we're merging, but hold kids accountable? And we have talked a lot about that, and I know you're, along with the rest of the board, very interested in that. It is much easier, honestly, to build a culture from the ground up than it is many times merging 2 cultures. And so we're very sensitive to that. We want to make sure that we get plenty of input and establish a roadmap along with training for our people so that we know how to do this. We're not just being reactive. And so we are talking a lot about that right now, Charles, for sure.
Yeah, and so I think it's very important that each school, I know there's variances and things for each particular school, but I think each school should have the same plan about how they handle disciplinary problems. And so, a lot of times you have a kid that's removed from the classroom, they go to a class, and it's called in-school suspension or some other term, and they're just in there sitting, they're not really doing anything. But if they need to be removed from the class temporarily, it needs to be under some type of academic instruction as well. They're not at home, but they're not being disruptive in class. Some of these kids have behavioral issues, mental health issues. Some of them may just be, bad kids that just need, that need to be in a structured discipline environment for a while. And so I think that if you had that structured environment where the children are removed from the class, but in an academic setting to where the teacher has a lesson plan and there's a teacher in there, or the teacher during the planning period or whenever can go check on the child, to answer any questions that the child may have as far as a lesson plan, I think that would help. Because no child, elementary school student, wants to be in detention or in school suspension for too long and they miss recess and things of that nature. So I think that's important. The other thing is the remediation programs. We lack that in our district, so I'm hoping that we can implement that to a higher level, because we looked at the test scores. We saw that some schools testing at 0%, 1%, 2%. Those numbers are deplorable. And so remediation should be a primary factor in what we're doing. So I hope that staff are trained and that we have administrators that are definitely going to implement, and hopefully one of these plans helps to implement remediation programs into our schools.
I think that's a great trade-up. So we talk in educational language, we talk about catching up, keeping up, and then accelerating. And so those really define the different types of programs we have. Remediation, let's catch up. Let's keep up by top-level effective professional development for our teachers and leaders, and then let's accelerate through our gifted and talented programming. So eyes are on this, we're on the same page, and we think through investment dollars that we can address these things.
Because a lot of times administrators say, well, I have to pick between remediation and pick between this. So are you saying, based on these plans, that we'll have, the administrators will have the resources to be able to implement those remediation programs?
I think that's always a goal in any district, regardless of a plan like this, is we have got to always review how we're training our people, the expectations we set, what's the programming that will allow us to serve our kids better. So absolutely, we're looking at those things.
And as far as the schools in my district, one that's being closed, Repurpose, is Centennial. Maybe a simple question people may know, but just for the people, the teachers and the staff at that particular high school, are they going to have a job?
Talking about the teachers?
It's teachers, staff. We've already talked about this
So
already.
yes, I mean, our message to our employees is we're going to, all employee groups, we're doing everything we can to protect employment. And so we know as students move, teachers need to move too. So we're not talking about reducing numbers of kids. We're simply talking about relocating kids. And so teachers have to move with kids. So we expect for all employee groups that we are going to be able to protect employment. And so it may look a little different. I mean, you know, we talked to a couple of groups of principals today, and they may be some of the most nervous, anxious people in the house, because when a school gets closed, that head principal position goes away. So what we have said to them is what I'm sharing with you, is that we want to do everything we can to protect employment. It may look different, but we want to employ our people. So yes, so the answer is a simple yes. We will move teachers and administrators and relocate them around our district.
Okay, so if you have a school that's closing, obviously that school, that staff, because there's issues about grade levels and being, you know, if you're a teacher at a certain grade level, but we just want to be ensured for the public that, you know, when you move a school, you have more students at that school, so there's a need for that particular staff that was at that old school to be at that new school, or to be, you know, in a different area if they have more expertise at that elementary level or the middle school level. But I just want to make sure on behalf of the teachers, the staff, and the clerks that, you know, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that all our employees that we have, you know, have a job.
That's our commitment.
Okay. And with the administrators, obviously we support our administrators. Obviously there are going to be issues about having dynamic administrators in these schools to make sure that these schools can be high-performing schools. And it shouldn't be just relegated to chief administrators or principals, but it should also be with assistant principals as well. Yep. Okay. In regards to the class in SAS, and we have talked about this before, so the current students will have reserved seats.
That's correct.
Classen is a magnet school, so it's an application process. You got the IB program based on academic criteria. You have the fine arts program. You're thinking about a different track. So one benefit if Classen moves to Northeast, and I've shared this with you before, is that, and from what we talked about, is that you reserve seats. So not just for the current students, but for the future of Classen, that kids that live in the Northeast community, there'll be certain reserved seats available for those children. And I think what that does is, you know, it builds up our community, because if you live on the northeast quadrant of town or in the vicinity of Classen, then I think that a lot of people will start moving back into our neighborhoods on the northeast side, because they know they can go to one of the best schools in the nation, because Classen is one of the best schools in the nation. The issue, you know, my mother's a graduate of Northeast High School. The issue is sometimes it's within the name, and I appreciate you for working that out and trying to work that out. But I think more importantly than the name is the fact that if Classen does move to Northeast High School, that the community understands that there are going to be reserved seats. I don't know what percentage that will be, but there will be reserved seats in the Northeast community that have parents that live in certain communities within the Northeast community. Their child will be able to go to go to Classen, and however you want to name it, but they'll be able to go to this school.
No, and that is the plan. That's been what we've talked about from day one, is that we want to reserve seats, and we're still working on percentages, but what we think that's critical as we transition into this building is that we give access to kids who live in these neighborhoods. So without question, we want to reserve seats for kids from this area.
And I appreciate that, because I always say strong schools build strong neighborhoods.
Agreed.
If you have a strong school in a community that's been deprived and neglected for so long, but there's a strong school, then we will have people that will move back into those communities. That community will flourish. Then the commercial environment around that community will flourish as well. So I don't want to take too much of your time on that. Also, I have an issue about, we talked about the charters with Hardings and the KIP.
Okay.
And I know a lot of people thought I was going to ask a charter question, so here's my charter question. So as far as the schools, those charters are concerned, those are some of the best schools in the nation. And from what you're saying is those schools aren't closing, that we're going to support those schools. And so you have certain schools that are open. The numbers that ADG gave as far as the spacing and the availability, because if those charters are looking at those other schools, are we definitely accurate in the count? Because there were 3 plans, there was A, B, and C, and they were kind of different based on optimization, but
right.
Are they going to have first priority in saying, you know, I want to be in this school?
So we haven't talked about first, second, third priority. Let's talk about capacities first. So a capacity can change based upon the percentage of enrollment that we expect in that school. So if you're in the south of I-40, we might say, you know, they're really growing, and so we want to set the capacity at an 85% of what ADG or an engineer might say really can fit in that building. So you're going to enroll to the 85%, leaving a 15% cushion for growth. You go into an area where it is stable or declining, you may want to build your capacity up closer to a 95%, okay? So that's why the differences in what capacities may look like. As far as our charters, the plan from day one was simply to receive information from ADG and to give options to those charters that were listed. So they're in a building that we own that it looks like it would take substantial financial impact to bring it up to where we believe it is at a suitable level. So we say, hey, we may have 1, 2, 3 other options for you to relocate your kids. Again, you know, I know Rebecca talked to some of our charter leaders about the issue, but we look forward to talking more about it. In no way are we trying to kick out, absolve, reduce any of our charter partners. It was simply an opportunity where we saw, hey, here's the report we got. It's not favorable for whatever reason. Would you be interested in occupying another space? It was a relocation. So again, we look forward to having more conversation with those leaders.
And the next part of that is that, you know, those particular charters that we named were very successful. So obviously at some point they may want to expand. So I think the issue is the building that they move into may be beneficial for their present student count. But if they ever want to expand or add grade levels in the future, they want to make sure that that school is also accessible to be able to.
And I think that's got to be part of the conversation we have with them. So as we say, hey, here are 2 or 3 schools, do any of them meet your needs, whether it's expansion or the condition of the building, or does it have spaces to operate in that feel good to us? We need to have those conversations for sure.
Okay. And I know that the Harding building, I know that building, a lot of people, that neighborhood has been revitalized because of that school. So I know that there's going to be a lot of questions about that and about whether or not that building is actually should be condemned or not. But I don't want to really discuss that too much, but there is a concern out there.
Well, and I don't think, I mean, I know from our side, I don't know where the word condemnation comes from. Nobody's ever said anything about condemning a building. We simply got information that we felt like, hey, this looks like a huge financial situation to bring it up to a level where we believe any of our kids, I mean, this is really, it is a Harding conversation now, but if this were any other school and we got a report that was similar, we'd be having the same conversation about that school. So it's really not, it's a bigger conversation than a building that we own that Harding Charter Prep and Harding Fine Arts occupy. This could have been any building around the district. If we would have had a similar report, we would have said, hey, let's talk about relocating those kids. So again, further conversation needed, but we are certainly open to conversation.
And I want to commend you for one thing, because I had talked to you about the parents like at Wilson having their kids feed into MLK or John Rex in the MLK. Right. And, you know, hopefully we would like to live in a better society, a more multicultural society, but that's not always the case. But I was a little apprehensive, just not because I didn't want it, but I know that there may be pushback and how you'd handle that. But I thought that you gave a very good answer in explaining that, is that we have pretty much have to, I'm going to give an answer that's not as good as your answer, but we have to get over it, you know, and we have to move forward, because your goal is for these schools to be excellent schools. We look at Booker T. Washington, and Booker T. Washington has always been comparable to Frederick Douglass, but Booker T. Washington is a magnet school in Tulsa, and it's still one of the best schools in the city of Tulsa, probably one of the best schools in the state, maybe in the nation as well. I think that when we talk about issues or parents being uncomfortable with their children going to a school in a neighborhood where the people in that neighborhood don't look like them, or maybe the area is not affluent like the area that they have, those are questions and concerns. Now, they may not say that out loud. They may say something different, but that is a concern, and I just appreciate you being open to that conversation, because if they do have those questions, I know you're open to answering those questions, but I like the answer that you did give me, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Charles.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Charles. Rebecca?
Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody that stayed this long. Much appreciated. I represent a lot of people. I represent the disabled community in our schools. So we know that we have staff with disabilities. We also know that we have students with intellectual disabilities, developmentally behavioral disabilities that are not in schools that are boundary driven. Like we have self-contained classes, and some of those are in classes in buildings that are going to close. We also know, especially parents with kids in special education, have a lot of questions about where do they fit in this program and what's going to be the plan for that. So when do you anticipate having a plan for those families? And then my second part of it is, because the questions around their concerns and their feedback are so specific, is it possible to have a point person to collect feedback from those individuals instead of just coming to the ground community meetings? And
great idea. Great idea. So let me answer the first part. So just a general statement. Bottom line is we all care about our kids and we're going to take care of our kids. And so we have schools on the closure list that have programming within the school to address the needs of those kids with the most challenges, the special needs kids. And so what we want to do as quickly as possible is identify schools in proximity to those schools that will take over some of that program. As we built capacity in all of our schools, we isolated at least 2 rooms, 2 classrooms in every school that would be dedicated to kids with special needs. And so if we need to expand that, we can. But 2 things were important. One, that we provide the same level of support to our kids who go to a school that is now going to be closed, and that it is close to that school. So we know routine is important, and so that is at the top of our list to make sure that not only we identify where programs will go, but we communicate very quickly out to that community and those parents. The second piece, remind me what the second piece.
A point person for special education feedback.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So we have a director of special education, Erin Trussell, and she will be our point person for that. And so all that communication can go through her, and then we will begin kind of that feedback loop very quickly. So here's my concern. We get it to Erin, and she gets responses back very quickly to those who have the concerns. Locations, programming, kind of the what ifs, those elevated concerns that we know many of our families have. Now, that's good. Thank you for that.
And obviously, I know Beth will probably coordinate on that at some point. So I'm excited about that. The other is going to be a little bit of a long-winded. I'm going to try to keep this short. But feedback that keeps coming back over and over again is, gosh, this was a short, this just came out of the blue, right? Even though we've been talking about it for 6 months, at least in the public eye, it seems like, wow, I'm just now hearing about this, or can't we have more time, or so I want you to think back to June of 2017. That was my 2nd month on the board, and we had our first operations committee meeting chaired by Ms. Carrie Jacobs, and Ron Milliken was on that committee at the time, and Scott Randall. And we had a very serious talk about what do successful districts do, and what do they have that we don't. And they have updated demographic studies, so they know where their students are going to be today, tomorrow. They have their bond authorizations planned out multiple years in advance, so there is no decaying buildings, there's no gap. We're not paying curriculum out of general fund. And they have a long-term facilities plan. They know what their buildings need. They know when their buildings are declining. They know what their populations are. And what we knew from having been in our buildings is that we had, to Jace's point, some that were beyond capacity and some that were way under. And so Carrie Jacobs said as our goal that we will have a long-term facilities plan. We will have a process. And so this is way before Dr. McDaniel. So throughout the next year, or the next 6 months, we looked at school districts that had successful long-term plans. We looked at models for this. We looked at timelines. We talked to Scott about bringing in an assessment firm, how that would happen. So there was a lot of push by the board committee, the operations committee, and the finance committee to say, what is this going to take? And this is the sort of thing that often got kicked to the wayside because who has time? We're already short-staffed, And so now you're adding that on everybody's plate on top of it. So if you look back to our board session in January 2018, before Dr. McDaniel's even here, you'll see a basic timeline. Huh? A year ago today. If you look back a year ago today, you will see a timeline and many of the things that ended up being the pathway to greatness. And, you know, Rebecca Kay, I commend you for, I mean, she got to listen to me and get my PowerPoints and everything else. And then the next thing I want to say is when we went into interviewing a new superintendent, we asked very hard questions about, have you ever been through a facilities process like this? Have you ever closed schools? What was the lessons that you learned? And then the all-important question, are you ready to make this your first year at OKCPS, this project? Because it's a huge undertaking. And a lot of people at the time we announced Dr. McDaniel were like, you know, where'd this guy come from? But behind it, we all knew where we were going with this and what kind of skill set we needed. So I want to commend the staff for all the work you've done on top of your regular day and keeping schools moving. I want to commend, I mean, I could go through the list, but I also want to just say, Dr. McDaniel, you have done a great job through this. I know it is not easy, and many of you you're in the audience going, well, wait a minute, what about me? But if you could see from our side how much goes into this, you know, it's not a perfect process. We could have done certain things better, but we really did make some really good choices, and I could not be happier for what we're going to be doing in the future over the next 5 years.
Awesome, thank you. Carrie?
I have all the questions. So can you talk about how families are going to be notified and engaged about boundary changes or closures for next year?
So as you leave tonight out in the lobby foyer area, you can find some oversized, gigantic boundary maps. And so you can walk out there, here's path A, B, C, and you can see here's where I live, and here's where I will go to school next year. So that's kind of level one. Today, right now, you can do that. We will release, if it hasn't already been released, we will release all this information, including maps, on our website. So beginning tonight as you leave, you can get the full presentation, take your time with it, review it, and you can also find the maps of boundary line changes. And so it will give the existing boundary, here's what a school looks like today, and it will give next year's boundary line, proposed boundaries in each of the pathways. Additionally, once we get our leaders in place, so by March the 5th, we will have every head principal in place. We know that's domino number one, and then we begin selecting assistant principals, and then we begin putting teacher teams together. Shortly thereafter, communications will begin going out to the kids who will be coming into my school. And so we're not waiting till June. We're going to get on this very quickly and through the spring, and that will include, as we talked about before, opportunities for students and families who are being relocated to come and walk through their new school and meet community members and kind of look side by side and see which other kids are attending the school. So lots of things in store, but specifically to the point is lots of different methods to show you here's where I am now and here's where I will be moving forward.
I have some questions about the Trailblazers Committee. I loved, all of the trade-ups that they focused on, I just love. And so I wanted to know, first, how do you go about choosing those kinds of trade-ups? Because, I presume it's like being a parent, you want to give your kids every possible thing. And how did you guys identify which would have the largest impact? And then are there ideas that you've identified as like, this has got to happen, but maybe not this year?
Yes. So I think one of my big takeaways from the process is that this has to be an ongoing conversation. I think that I will speak for, I don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking for the committee because I was their facilitator, more than anything, that they really want to see this be a continuing process where we have a team of educators who come together and have these conversations from across all lines in the district. I mean, I think first we started with a set of big questions. That's really what set the stage for everything. It was questions like, which kids should be in schools together? Because we knew that going in that the grade bands across the district were like that slide you saw, really messy. It's something that affects educators, it affects families. We asked questions about what kind of school programming should we be focused on? And some really interesting things happened along the way, which were, we asked that question and I thought we were gonna talk a lot about what specific kinds of electives we should be offering and what kinds of career pathways we might want to talk about. And the team really felt strongly that we needed to focus on organizational culture. We needed to focus on targeted professional learning around implicit bias and culturally responsive instruction and other culturally responsive practices. They really wanted to focus on making OKCPS a better place to work and making sure that our kids are supported. So because we started from this place of, you know, really thinking about the root causes of the reasons that we have kids who do not consistently have access to equitable, rigorous, culturally responsive learning opportunities, that's how this kind of bubbled up to be the top things. There are a lot of other things on the list that didn't have an impact on the boundaries and which schools feed into what other schools that are kind of to be continued. Some of them, like we had a conversation about school start times, have pretty significant implications for transportation, and so it's something that we have to look at financially if next year would be a time that we could think about a realignment and making consistent our school start times, just as one example.
Thank you. So community organizations that are interested in our buildings, are we talking about sales, leases, partnerships? Can you give more information about that?
So we have a long list. You saw a partial list. We have a long list of interested parties. And when I say interested, really the bulk of the interested parties overwhelmingly are people who want to come be partners with us. So it's medical care, it's counseling services, it's mentoring programs. There are people who mostly live in our community who say, we want to be a part of this. We want to come in and occupy space and take care of specific needs that we think exist in the district. So we've looked at opportunities to sell particular properties, mainly those that are already closed. So we talked about the padlocks and the boarded windows, and we've got some interest in those from different areas. I mean, I think the city, I think Habitat for Humanity is interested in purchasing a couple of our buildings. We're going to have further conversations about that. And so there are a handful that we would either sell or demo, but mostly it's taking charters who have an interest, who we believe we can have a conversation about relocation. It is about temporary, maybe offices. You know, as we convert this building, we've got a whole bunch of administrators who are in this building that need to be relocated so that we can take advantage of all the spaces here. And then all those services that we talked about. I mean, our mental health task force, our compact, are working feverishly to begin lining up these support services that can occupy our schools. So it's really a mixed bag of what might end up in a school, but we feel really good about limiting those schools that we have to board up. I mean, we don't want to see that for any of our schools. So we feel good about progress right now.
Can you talk a little bit about capacity, identifying what is an ideal capacity for school, like not necessarily saying across the board we want every school to be at 85% capacity, but you've talked in the past about how some schools might have different capacities based on what's happening in the community. Can you talk about that specifically?
Well, I think my conversation would, to respond to that, would really begin with teacher teams. And many times how you define your staff will dictate what your capacity might be. So we've said that it's important at the elementary level, as an example, that we have at least 3 teachers at every grade level. So then you begin looking at class sizes. You know, what are our ideal class sizes? And you can begin staffing a building based on staffing first. What do we need as a minimum? 3 in every grade level, and then work kind of back into your capacity. Now we balance that with what we know to be a true capacity in a building. So Scott's group and ADG, they looked at capacities 4 different ways. I mean, you can look at the square footage of an elementary school, and we know that there are guidelines and recommendations on how many square feet every individual kid needs, and now you can build a capacity. Another way that they've done multiple times is you walk the building and you count rooms. And you know, in some of our schools, because we've not been at capacity for several years, a room that was built to be a classroom has kind of morphed into a workroom / lounge / whatever. So you literally count spaces. You look at square footage by room. So not to bore you, but multiple ways to identify what the capacity of a building is. Then you look at growth area. So am I on the south side, high growth area? Am I northeast, where there's not so much growth, it's stable? And then I can enroll kids up to an 85, 90, 95% mark based upon square footage, how many square feet per kid, and then what we know to be the true capacity of the building. I don't know if that answered your question. But
Yeah, that did.
okay.
So between March and the start of school, not a lot of time. How are all of these construction projects going to be done? I mean, I'm presuming we're going to have to hire some outside folks.
Yeah, sure. So it's going to be a combination of our people that we put to work, and they have varying skill sets, expertise areas, and let's get them to work, build some teams, and let's go. Combined with contracting work out. So we have lots of great partners that Scott can identify different areas, whether it's simple construction, plumbing, whatever the need is, electricians, and we will contract them out, going through the bid process when necessary, and deploy them as well. So creating these high-functioning teams of our people combined with contractors that we trust and who have come through the bid process, and let's get to work. We know it's a short window. We're going to attack it on March 5th. We've got a meeting at 5:30 that morning, right? Oh, I didn't tell you that, did I? And we're going to get after it, and we're going to make sure that those priority 1 needs that our kids have as we move schools and relocate are going to be met by the time we start school. When do we start school? August 12th. And so when we start school, we're going to be ready to go with priority 1. And then everything else is work in progress from there. So we're a little anxious about it. We are a little anxious about it. But we believe we can accomplish this, so we're looking forward to it.
What about staffing? Can you talk about how employment's going to work? And I know you guys have been having conversations all along with EFT and the other organizations. Like, are teachers going to follow their kids when, I mean, this is right during hiring season. Like, how is all of that going to work?
So we have 3 documents that we must follow: school board policy, state law, and then our collective bargaining agreements with our 3 different unions. And so as we make decisions about staffing, where teachers go, where principals and assistant principals go, and then where support employees go, we will stay within the boundaries of those 3 documents. But we have a very good relationship with the leadership, with all 3 union groups. We have engaged in conversation as recently as today, this afternoon, with those groups, all 3 groups today. And so we are on the same page, moving down the same path together. We will listen to their input. We will follow those parameters that we've established, stay within them. And then really it's a matter of building the most effective team of adults at every school. So we want, obviously, stellar school leaders. We want outstanding assistant principals. We want the very best teacher in every single classroom. So we build those teams based upon skill sets, preferences, and then staying within the boundaries of our documents.
The only buildings that are identified for closing without repurposing are Seaworth and Harding, correct?
Emerson?
Emerson
Emerson South?
And that one is to move out of that lease.
Right.
Okay. And then I also saw the acreages that are listed at the bottom, just the empty property. So is that something that we're going to surplus also? Has that already been surplused?
We've surplus some. Okay, so recommending surplus and sold. So that would be that very bottom section. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You guys have done all of the things we've asked you to do. You've gathered all of the data, more than I thought could be gathered in one lifetime. You guys have heard feedback and incorporated it. It doesn't hurt any less when you see the list. It's still a punch to the gut, and you know, like Rebecca said, it's something we've been talking about for so long, but still to see the names on paper, you're just like, oh, but not that one, or not this one. However, seeing the trade-ups and knowing what our kids are going to get, it takes away the gut punch. And I'm so glad that our students are going to have the things that they undoubtedly deserve. Kids deserve a counselor. They deserve nurses. They deserve an appropriately staffed school. They deserve teachers who have someone to collaborate with, especially when you have new teachers or emergency alternatives. I'm alternatively certified, and I can't even imagine having no coworkers to ask questions to. So I think that is going to immediately help kids in the classroom, and I feel confident that this is the right thing to do, and it's going to be hard and uncomfortable and sad and great in the end. So thank you guys for listening to the board and listening to the community. You guys have really done every single thing we've asked, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, thank you. That brings to me. Got a couple things, not too terribly much. One is, I know you said the maps are outside hanging up. When is that going to be released digitally? Because I'm getting quite a bit. That's going out tonight, and that'll be on our website? Okay,
So
that's an
tonight,
easy
yes, ma'am.
answer.
And the PowerPoint presentation and a new frequently asked questions document. That should be really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much for that. All right, what do you say to the parents of fourth graders who worry about the transition from elementary to middle school 1 year sooner?
I think it begins with, we're here to take care of kids. We heard a little bit ago about families who have children with special needs and worried about where they're going to go. My school closed, that's where my children were. We're going to take care of those kids. We're going to communicate back out to them. Lots of moms and dads and grandmas and guardians who have been thinking all year that I've got one more year in elementary, or maybe 2 more years with my son or my daughter or my grandchild. And so this is abrupt. And so we're going to start with the same comment. We're going to take care of our kids. Regardless of what school you go to in our district, we know the following. We know that there are teachers and support employees and administrators who love kids, and they are there to take care of kids. And so I think there has to be a confidence in that. I would tell them that we value their communication. I would tell them that we're going to provide expanded after-school opportunities. I would tell them that we got outstanding bus drivers who, when they get on the bus, we're going to take care of them. When they get off the bus, we're going to take care of them. We got people all over our district who are here to serve families and to take care of kids. So while the expectation is not going to be met, I don't get 1 more or 2 more years of elementary. We're going to take care of kids. Second thing is we're going to teach them appropriately. So because we're moving 4th, now we're into 5th, and oh my gosh, it's a middle school, we will have trained teachers to teach them appropriately. We're not just sending fifth graders into the middle school. And I think that is a fear. It's a fair fear that we have. You know, I can conjure up all kinds of thoughts about what that might look like. So we're going to be very purposeful about interacting. 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, when do they interact? Do they eat lunch together? Are they in PE classes or other classes together? And so we're going to design that to make sure that we're leaning toward elementary with our 5th graders, but getting them ready and allowing them to see how 6th grade and on into middle school works. So all around these kids, we're going to take care of them developmentally, and then just as we do as educators, we just take care of kids. And so I would try everything I could to relieve some anxiety, knowing that I'm not going to get fully there, because there are some anxieties that until they're in school and they're going to school and they're coming home happy, that we're not going to completely alleviate. So I would just do my very best to encourage and give some ideas on what it might look like.
Okay, thank you. So I did have a question originally, and I kind of added to it. But one is, we have several elementary schools that have specialty programs, and we'll just go with Wilson Arts Integration. That's in our neighborhood. Are we going to preserve the specialty programs? There's lots of fear out there that when we do a reinventing, that we're going to leave behind some of the programs of what made the school a top 10 school.
So one of our guiding principles, I think it's number 6, I'd have to go back and look, but one of the guiding principles is that we recognize good things going on in our district. And so if we identify in this school, arts integration program, good thing, we measure it, multiple measures, it's positive. Number 1, we want to preserve, but number 2, it would probably be a good idea to expand. So that's how we're coming at this, is that guiding principle tells us that we need to recognize good things that are going on and then protect and expand. That's what we want to do. That's how we're looking at that part of this pathway. So certainly we want to protect, yes.
So that brings me to my second part of that, that's kind of an addition, is if we're expanding class and SAS, do we have another application school in the district that's not purely application? Because what I'm hearing you say is that now SAS is not going to be purely application.
No.
Because you said we're going to reserve seats for the northeast side of town at an application school.
So if we reserve seats, they still have to meet the qualifications. Okay, we're simply saying that we want opportunity to be spread out to further parts of our district. So increase capacity, increase opportunity, reserve seats, but still qualifying.
I guess I don't understand that.
So if I say that at class in SAS, we're going to reserve 30%, I'm just throwing a number out, 30% of our seats will be reserved for neighborhoods around the northeast area. There are still sets of qualifications that kids have to meet to get into an application school. So if they meet it, they get one of those 30% of the seats. If we can't fill up the 30% with kids where we're reserving seats, then we open it up to other kids who now can take those seats. So still qualifications, criteria. I want to apply, I don't meet criteria. I can't fill up the 30% from kids who are designated. I can now open it up to other parts of the city to take those seats.
So you're expanding the MOU, because currently how we've been told is that if there's 5 classical guitarist spots open and only 4 are in our district, because we kind of reserve for our district already, then if there's not a 5th one, we can take one from UConn. But you're saying we're going to carve out another 30% specifically in our district, because we're already district bound, like we already reserve seats based on our district.
The enrollment's doubling too, right?
Yeah, the enrollment opportunity does double in both scenarios. I think what we're getting at is we're trying to expand opportunity. So this is located in the northeast section of our city, so it would make sense from a proximity standpoint, offering opportunity to kids who have not really had opportunity before. And that's just from a proximity standpoint. So if kids in neighborhoods that surround Northeast, if it becomes class in SAS, want to take advantage of attending school here, they would have a reserved amount of seats if they qualify.
How does that differ from just putting in an application? For if you qualify, you qualify.
I think it just goes back to, no, good point. I mean, we're working out details, but what we thought was important was that just from an equity opportunity standpoint, that we expand opportunities that currently there are limitations. I don't know that it's different.
But the wording would be different than any other application school we have in the district?
You mentioned a third track too.
Yeah, we've talked about adding a third or a fourth track as well. Well, we want to be consistent. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. And so let us get back and wordsmith and make sure that we're getting to what we want to get to. Really, the goal was to expand capacity, which we're doing, and then provide opportunity at our application schools where currently there are limitations. So that's really, those are the goals. How we get there, we need to probably juggle.
Well, in my mind, just by expanding capacity, you expand opportunity. I mean, so we can get back to that.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly not on board with changing what made class in SAS school the one that we're saying kids want to go to.
Let us work out that and bring something back to you, but I understand.
Anybody else have a last minute comment? Anybody? No? Okay.
Hey, I do. Can I make one comment?
Yes, please.
I have heard you all give kudos to our staff, and I want to do the same thing. This has been one of the most exciting processes I have ever been through, and I appreciate more than many of you know the fact that I got to inherit this. I mean, this started, as Rebecca pointed out, a long time ago. We've been having conversations for probably 20 years or more about how can we do school differently. But you really broke it down as a board about a year ago. And so I got to come in after a lot of this heavy lifting had been done. I cannot even begin to tell you, not just those sitting up here, but members of our team that are kind of scattered throughout the audience here, our teachers and principals who have really bought in and tried to get past some of this pain that we've all heard and talked about, with the understanding that we believe that this is going to be game changer for kids. We talk about this all the time, that you can trust us when we say, if this were a 50-50 proposition, or we hope that this might work, or let's keep our fingers crossed, we wouldn't be talking about this. We believe this is going to be game changer stuff for our kids. And so my thanks to our staff, to all of our employee groups who have really pulled in the same direction. I appreciate more than I can say. And to our board again, thank you for your oversight, your tough questions. And we're really excited about moving this forward. Thank you, Chair Lewis.
Okay. Beth just told me that as soon as we close, the website will be up live. Everything is good to go as far as the maps, the boundaries, the presentation, and a place for frequently asked questions. Is there a remote? Yes, Craig.
Madam Chair, quick house cleaning item. Board members, after adjournment, if you can stand by for 30 seconds, I have a information packet for each of you on the next upcoming Policies Committee meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, is there a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Ruth was the second. Jace was the first.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carries.